Hey, and welcome to today's episode of Gnosis podcast, where we talk about how we know what we know. And my guest today is Matt Parkinson, or Sword Matt on Instagram. He is a contestant from, remind me again, what show was that?
Forge and Fire, that one.
Yeah, Forge and Fire, the primo blacksmith competition show on channels where it shows. Um, so the way we had met is I was actually there as a story producer for one of his shop mates, Jamie. And so we had plenty of time of our hands to have a conversation about craftsmanship, mastery, um, forgeries, and we engaged in the unraveling of the riddle of steel. So, Matt, tell me a little bit about yourself, what you're into, and yeah, let's start there.
I'm Matt Parkinson. I've been a bladesmith for about 25 years, something like that. Currently a journeyman smith in the American Bladesmith Society. I'm looking to test for master later this year. I was on Forge and Fire twice. That's about it. I don't
know. That seems like a lot to me. So,
yeah, well, there's that
too. So 25 years and you're still a journeyman. What makes a master a master?
Well, to become a journeyman, first you have to join the American Bladesmith Society, wait 3 years, and then you can apply to become a journeyman smith. It's first part of that test is a performance test. You make a 10-inch knife, 2-inch wide, no more than 15 overall. Has to go through a free hanging 1-inch manila or sisal rope, chop a 2x4.5 twice, shave hair afterwards, and then bend 90 degrees. You have to do that in front of Mastersmith. I did that process in 2016. So, I joined I fought joining the ABS for a really long time because the kind of stuff that I do or did at the time was mostly medieval swords and Viking stuff and didn't super apply to the ABS. But as I started concentrating a little more on more contemporary knife shapes and forms, the ABS started to make more sense to my career. So I joined. After you've passed your journeyman, you have to wait, I think it's 3 years. And then that's for I have a very. All right, there we go.
Is that better? So you start breaking
okay.
up it.
I had an alarm go off. I don't know what that was about.
Got it.
Not bad. It's fun. So once you're in for 3 years, once you're a journeyman smith for a master, you can test for master after 3 years. The hard part of testing is not the performance test. After you've done the performance test, you have to submit 5 knives to a jury of 7 mastersmiths, or as I like to think of them, angry old men with sharp eyes. And they go over your work, and look for symmetry and straightness, fit, finish, design, everything that makes a good knife. And then they judge if you pass. I think it's 4 out of 7. You become a journeyman. Mastersmith, you wait 3 years, and then essentially it's the same test again, except this one, the performance test has to be a hidden tang knife with 300 layers of Damascus. And then the 5 knives you submit are also held to a higher standard. And one of them needs to be a Quillian dagger, and there's a bunch of rules around what that dagger has to be.
Got it. So you spend time learning your craft, and then you become a journeyman, which means that you have some level of expertness in your craft. And then when you present to masters, it's an agreement amongst people that understand what it takes to make a knife, and setting a standard.
Yeah, essentially a very, very high standard. Knives from journeyman smiths are expected to be of excellent quality. They're expected to know what they're doing, what they're making, how they're making it. The master smith is just in theory, just supposed to be that much above a journeyman. You know, that they're supposed to have mastery over all techniques, not rely on luck in their builds, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And it isn't always the case. You know, there's some master smiths who have probably aged out a little bit, maybe, or maybe weren't quite as good as the judges thought. Maybe they got lucky. I don't know. Or maybe just haven't continued to practice. And you know, for me, it's not, you know, yes, it's a mark of my skill level at the point where I pass the thing, but it's
Right.
not like, you know, it's not like I become master and think, oh, I'm done. I'm never going to get better than this. It's never, that's not how things work. You're always progressing. You're always getting better. You're
Right.
always looking for the next thing to master. It's just a point of where people notice where you've gotten to, I guess.
Right. You're being recognized by knowledgeable people in your peer group. And
I think the more important thing for me anyway for testing isn't so much being recognized. Well, that's nice and it feels great to be recognized with an award or whatever. That's great. But for me, applying myself to a set of knives that's going to be judged by an outside set of standard, it kind of removes the bullshit meter. You know what I mean? Like there's no like, oh, that's cool. Yeah, no, I love that. I meant to do that. No, I fucking didn't meant to do that. No. You know what I mean? It removes all of that. And you can't lie to yourself. Like definitely doing Journeyman Smith, I realized a lot of the stuff that I was spouting for years and years and years about my work was just me making excuses.
right.
You know, itself, not necessarily to other people. Like I was making excuses to myself.
Right. Yeah, it's not that your work wasn't great. It's just serendipity played a larger part than intention. And
yeah, that was a big part of it. And then there was certain design features that I was avoiding because they were hard and I never learned how to do them really. And you know, my excuse was, well, they don't exist on this kind of knife, and that's the only thing I make. You know, yeah, no, you're just doing it because you didn't want to make the other knives because they were hard.
got it.
You know, because they were stupid or anything, just because they were hard.
You know, that kind of brutal honesty about where you are in your process is probably another thing that separates a master and a journeyman, because, you know, you're so busy protecting this knowledge that you've earned, right? And yet you still know there's somewhere to go.
You know, that's the funny thing is like in the knife world, especially, well, at least in the American knife world, we don't protect our knowledge. There's very few things that are new enough to bother trying to like keep secret. You know, and like 95% of the things we make these days, I could show anybody exactly how I'm doing it, tell them exactly how to do it, teach them how to do it, and it's still gonna come out different because it's not me.
Right. That's interesting. So why are you practicing? What, you know, there must be a more modern, better way of making a knife. You know, technology marches forward and all that. Why are you practicing what some would call a dead art?
I like it. It's I don't know. That's a weird question. Yeah, I look back at like the last 30 odd years of my life and how I got to from where I was to where I am now. And looking backward, there's a straight line. Straight line of like, well, that decision led to this decision, led to this decision, led to me here. And it's not that there wasn't false starts or anything, but like even those made me realize, okay, well, I really am not suited to do this other thing. I need to go back to this.
Right.
I've been working for myself since I was 22, 21 years old. So probably the vast majority of my life, I've worked for myself. I've held some jobs, but I've never been comfortable doing a 9 to 5. And at this point, there's no possible way anybody would put up with me, you know? And like, you know, for a long time I did ironwork and bladesmithing was a sideline, but I always came back to making knives and swords. Like it just never was not a thing.
Right.
You know, I tried to quit and I couldn't. Like it's not a thing. Like if I don't do it, it hurts. You know what I mean? And how I make the thing is part of that. Like it's not, I don't know, like it's like a calling or something. It's like I need to do it or I'm not okay,
Right.
mentally. So I do it, and it just makes it easier to do it if I'm going to make it my living from it, and I'm put a lot of effort and thought into how to do that and make it work. And after a long time of failing at that, I sort of figured it out.
All right. That's we are entrepreneurs, we're artists, we are people of singular tastes, I would say, because if you're going to be a creative and you're trying to run a business, the business side doesn't make sense with the passion.
Well, and I think that's the thing that I've figured out over the last probably 10 years or so, basically since my son was born. I've really figured out more of how to make the business side of it work, and how to make the marketing side work with the business. After doing it for long enough, there were certain things that I just knew, like, I know how to keep the books balanced. That's not business. That's accounting. You know what I mean?
Right.
Knowing when to go in debt versus when to be like, no, we're not going into debt. That's more of a business decision. Over the summer, we put a lot of money into our power hammers, and I was broke as hell from basically June through about a week ago. Like I was so stressed for money, more stressed than I've been for money in a long, long time.
Right.
But I knew it was temporary. It wasn't going to be like, that's not how the business is going to run. I just dropped, a quarter of our earnings on fixing 2 power hammers that needed to be done.
Right.
I didn't have a business. So, we needed to do that. And we all agreed on that, but that sucked a bunch of money out and sucked a bunch of time out. I didn't make anything in the shop for 2 months, really. So I had nothing to sell. So it was like a double whammy, But it just needed, and then on top of that, summer for me is always the slowest season. Like I never a lot of money in July, August. July, August is always slow. September, November, December starts picking up, and my busiest season is always from like end of October through like the middle of March.
Oh,
that's
wow.
where income comes. So it's weird. I don't really understand entirely why that is. I mean, some of it's like holiday season stuff, and then there's tax return season, but it just seems like that's the thing. Like nobody wants to buy swords in the summer. Nobody wants to buy chef's knives in the summer.
Right. Well, maybe they're thinking they don't need to fend off the winter so much in the summer. I don't know.
I think a lot of it is that people end up spending their disposable income, because I have to be reasonable and understand that everything I make gets purchased with disposable income. Nobody needs what I make. It's not a thing. Like you don't need a $2,000 chef's knife. You don't need a $5,000 sword. You want those things. You buy those things with your disposable income. And people in the summer tend to use their disposable incomes for vacations, not buying the pretty sword.
Right.
So whether or not that's the reason, that seems to be very true. It's not to say I don't make any money with those times, but it picks up in September, October.
So how do you manage your finances knowing that you have a seasonal hole? I mean, you've got enough data, you've done it long enough, you're going to have a more than likely a dip. So how do you manage your stuff over the year?
I try to build in a cushion into my finances. So like I try to have money saved, which that didn't work at all this year. It didn't help also that I had a bad blade show. I made nothing. And then I came home with COVID. So I was laid out for 3 weeks, and then, kind of a slowish recovery after that. So basically all of June, July in August was either eaten up by being sick or recovering from being sick or fixing the power hammer. So like 3 months of nothing. But, I do make a little bit of money usually in the summer, and I teach, and that helps a lot. I usually do at least 3 or 4 classes over the summer. This year was only 2, but
sorry, go ahead.
I did a little less this year, just because I was trying to spend more time with the family this year, which was nice, but it definitely, I missed the income for sure.
Hold on.
Lost your mic or lost your camera?
Yes.
That's all right.
I'm coming back.
Oh, there you go.
There you go. This is now twice that I have I need to figure out a way to externally power that camera. And now I'm so used to looking at my camera that I'm forgetting that I'm on a different camera. Oh man. So how much do you think you spend of your working day? I mean, I guess having watched you build something, it's kind of meditative. You're like focusing on that. How much of that is you being fully present in what you're doing in the knife, and how much is your brain space working on a business problem so that you can continue doing the thing that you do?
So the other thing I've done to help moderate lows, I have multiple revenue streams. I think that anybody who does this kind of stuff for a living, you need to have multiple streams of revenue. You can't just be like, you can't do just custom work and be like, I'm just going to make these swords, and then you run into a problem with the sword, and then the sword that was supposed to be done last month isn't done for 3 months, and now you're like broke for 3 months because you're waiting to get paid, and then you're behind, and
Right.
that doesn't. I've done that for years. So you need to have like multiple streams of revenue. For us in the shop, we do classes here. That's a huge thing. That's a great revenue stream that's not dependent on us finishing work. Just I show up for the class, I teach the class, everybody's happy, then look, money, good, cool, yay. And they tend to be, classes tend to fill, especially like less expensive 1 or 2 day classes tend to fill a lot more when money's more tight, because experience, I think, means more to people than items sometimes. So that tends to balance out. And then I make some tools and stuff that are like less of my energy put into them. I get water jet cutting done, and then I have the engraving done somewhere else, and then I bring them to a heat treater, and then like I'm doing a minimal amount of work on it, so it doesn't take my time up. But it's a good product that puts out, so I can mark it up and make money. That's part of it. And then I try to always have some stuff available for sale, just in general. Sometimes it's pieces from classes that I've taught that I finish out. Sometimes it's just if I have a little bit of extra time, or I'm like really not feeling like what I need to work on,
Right.
I'll work on something else and just get it done. Shows, a lot of times I put in a show in my schedule just so that even if I don't make anything at the show, I'm forced to make some product and have something laying around to sell. That's when you were here, that's pretty much what I was doing. I was working on stuff for Blade Show.
Right.
And I knocked out a bunch of stuff, and some of it sold, but a lot of it is what just got me out of that hole.
Right.
So.
That's great. So how do you keep your interest in what you're doing? It takes a lot of technical knowledge, right? But you can kind of automate that in your own mind. This thing, that thing, and the steps to do it. So how do you keep it fresh? What do you do to? I mean, yeah, you're working on your master thing. So what do you do?
Yeah, there's always more stuff to learn. There's always more stuff, some new direction to go in, and some new thing to study and look into. The hard part is not letting that distract you from the thing that you're being paid to do. I have a sword on my bench that I'm way behind on, and I've been struggling with it. And it's a lot of the reason I've been struggling with it is because it was something I took on, I was excited about at the time. And then I started building it, and it was like, this is really not what I wanted to make. And I'm struggling with like, do I make it the way I want to make it, even though the customer is not going to be happy about that? Or do I make it the way I told the customer I was going to make it and just get it done? And then that's not working. And it's just, I've redone the guard like 5 times, and I'll get it finished eventually, but it's not what I want to be working on right now. I have this new idea in pattern welding that I've been playing with. I made a couple of knives in that style, and I'm like really kind of obsessive about like, I really want to make more of this kind of pattern weld.
Right.
And you know, and any opportunity I have to be able to do that, I'm doing that. Good chance and a good portion of my master smith set will have that kind of pattern mold in it.
Wow. So, yeah, that's often a problem I have. I start on a project. I know I want to get it somewhere, but I feel kind of lost in the middle of it. And it's time I gotta discipline myself back and like, it's time to finish. Just get it done and get it out. You can go ahead.
I close my books for that reason. Like, in the beginning of the pandemic, I sort of panicked and I booked a bunch of work because it was there and it was guaranteed. And I knew I wasn't going to have classes and I knew I wasn't going to have this and I wasn't going to have that. And I was like, no one's going to buy a bunch of stuff when there's no work, you know. And it ended up being kind of a non-issue. Like, you know, between the PPP loans we got at the shop and what I did manage to sell, I actually had a fine year. Like, it wasn't super scary, you know.
Right.
The PPP made up for the income from classes, and everything else was actually up. So it was like kind of weird. I'm like, okay, so that's fine. And then I managed to finish a bunch of the swords that I'd taken on commission. I have 2 left, and I just don't want to have another 2 years of work hanging out in front of me like the rest of the guys. So I'm just not taking any custom work on right now. I'll just close that. And really, I don't want to get rid of it entirely because I'm afraid to, but I definitely want to move more toward just making what I want to make, putting it out there for sale. If it sells, awesome. If not, then I starve, and much less awesome. I like food. I don't want to starve. You know, and then that's the whole reason I haven't done that yet is like, yeah, everything I've made eventually sells, but I mean, I've sold stuff that I sat on for, you know, a year, 2. I have a sword that I haven't sold. It's been up for sale for a couple of years, and like eventually it'll find a home.
Right.
But I can't count on when that's going to happen. So, you know, on the other hand, I made a $3,500 chef's knife on spec that I was like, hey, whatever, I can sit around. It's really cool. I sold it in 3 months.
Wow.
So like, okay, cool, you know, but I can't count on that either. So, I don't know where my line is in the future, but I'm definitely moving more away from custom work, I think.
That makes sense.
Also, I don't like working for other people, and I don't like when they tell me what to do. So,
I guess you got to pick either you want the ready money or do you want to do what you want to do, right?
Yeah. Well, and look, a lot of my customers are really, really cool about that. You know, the gentleman I'm working for now, like, I tried to fire him 3 times. Like, I was like, super behind, dude. I'll give you your cash back. Like, I'll finish it out however I feel like it. And like, we're square, we're fine. He's like, no, sounds like it's gonna be epic. Just finish it out. Fuck. You know.
Yeah. So you tried to quiet quit on him, and he wouldn't take the out.
Yeah. He's like not letting me fire him. It's very, very frustrating. But you know, whatever. It'll be an awesome sword when it's done. So it's fine. And then other guys I've worked for, you know, I was taking much longer on their job, but like they were super cool. Like they were like, hey man, don't worry about it. This is coming out great. Just let me know what's going on. You know, and I finished the sword and I'm charging them a pretty good premium on them. I shipped the sword off to them, and there's always this like, you know, this fear when I sell things that high a cost, where I spent like, you know, a good 2 months working on something, and it's the better part of my income for 2 months, and ship it off, and I'm like, you know, I know all the fuck ups and all the flaws and everything I make. I never see it holistically for what I wanted to make. I see what I was accepting of what I made, if that makes. And you know, they'll get the thing, and I get a message with a photograph of like a big smile, and the guy's wife's holding the sword, and like, this thing's awesome. I'm like, thank you so much. You went above and beyond. I'm like, cool. All right. I don't feel like that as much anymore, you know?
It's that imposter syndrome, I think, because we always know the truth of the situation. Is like, we know what we're doing, but you know,
it's like the opposite of Dunning-Kruger. Like Dunning-Kruger is everything is awesome because I know a little bit, and this is like I know everything, so everything fucking sucks.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to get the joy out of something when you're always looking to improve.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because like one of the things I enjoy about having spec work on the table is like I'll finish a knife, I'll throw it in the case, you know, and I'll ignore it. I'll put it up on Etsy or whatever for sale, or put it on sale. And I'm not hiding anything about what that knife is. Like I
Right.
make sure there's something I'm not happy with, I put it in a picture, and I don't, you know, tell people I'm not happy with it, but you know, I put it in a picture and I make sure I don't hide it because
Mm,
you know it's not, that's not for me to choose to do. Like they want, you know, I want to be honest about representation of my work. So, you know, invariably I'll look at it 2 months later or 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later or whatever, like when it sells and I go to ship it, I'm like, yeah, this is a cool fucking knife. This came out all right. Once I step back enough that I can see the object for what it is, that that goes away. But when I'm working specifically for somebody else and I'm working to an unknown standard, that's when I start to freak out, especially when it's like a high price point, if that makes
mm-hmm.
sense. Because
Yeah.
like, you know, I used to be one of the things we used to say in the shop a lot was, man, I'm only getting this much. This is what they get. And I got sick of saying that. Like, you know, it's only a $1,500 sword. I can't afford to do this thing I want to do
Right.
because it's only a $1,500 sword. And either I would do the thing and just be like, I'm gonna fucking lose the money, I don't care, or I would just justify that, you know. And I got sick of justifying things, so I started raising my price point,
Mm,
and people still bought. And now I can't say, well, you know, it's only a, because it's not. You
right.
know, and it's like all of a sudden I'm like getting car money for a sword, and I'm like, okay, it's used car money, but it's still car money, and
Right.
like you know, I don't want to shortchange the customer. Like that feels bad, and like I obsess about making it to the best I can make it, and that then I lose money because I'm taking too long to do it. It's, I don't know. I don't do that when I'm working on spec. Like when I'm working on spec, I make it the way I want to make it to make me happy, and then I put it out there for the price I want for it. And if it sells, awesome. You
Right.
know, if I sell a $6,000 sword that way, cool, awesome. But I don't feel like stress about shipping it out
Mm-hmm.
at that point.
Right. Right.
Or when I ship a sword that I've custom made for somebody to their specification, there's always a little bit of stress until I hear back from that customer that they're happy.
Well, I bet you hear that they're happy and excited far more often than you hear complaining, unless you sell to another blacksmith.
Yeah, no, I mean that. Yeah, these days for sure, for sure. Um, you know, there's always the one or two that you know, and then you just give me your the blade back, and I'll give you your money. I'm done. I don't want to have you as a customer anymore. Uh,
Mm,
but that's really rare. You know, it's really
right.
rare because people who are putting that kind of money down on a blade, they've already researched me. They already know who I am. They
Right.
know my, they know what to expect, and that's what they want. So when they get what they want, they're excited. You know, they're not surprised by anything that I make,
Right. Well, I
unless it's
mean,
unless it's in a good way. Usually, you know.
right. This is beyond what they had expected.
Mhm.
Um, what are the pressing weird issues in the sword world? You were talking to me about um these fake medieval swords and medieval weapons that kind of are showing up. Um,
For a long
what?
time.
Yeah. So how does that happen?
Um, hmm, well, there's a lot of ways that happens. You know, there's swords that are not what they're purported to be in every museum everywhere. If there's not a solid archaeological provenance on it, then it's probably fake or messed with in some way. Um, that has been going on since probably the early Victorian era. So now we have swords that are legitimate antiques that have been in collections for 100 and something years that are not real medieval swords.
Do people know they're not real?
Yes, and that's also not talked about, because in that world of medieval sword collectors, originals, a lot of the way these swords get provenance is by passing through well-known collections. So if you call out a sword for being fake that came from X person's collection, and you have a sword in your collection that's X person that came from them, even if you're sure yours is real, you've devalued it. And that's really tough. And then on top of that, there's some unsavory folks in the market who are using it to, I'm fairly certain, launder money, because real medieval swords at auction can go for pretty large sums of money, and it's a pretty easy way to launder some capital.
So let me just see if I'm understanding that. Someone who wants to hide ill-gotten gains will hire a forger, or will trade with a forger the dirty asset for this new thing that is worth some value, and then they release that thing on the market.
Kind of. I think it's more of they work with these forgers who aren't necessarily even knowing they're forging things. Like, it's not, I mean, some of them are definitely, some of these smiths are definitely know what they're doing. Others are just smiths who are getting commissions and then, justifying it to themselves. I don't know how they're justifying it. So they may not even know it's a problem. I don't know. I don't know. A lot of these guys are out of like Estonia or Lithuania or, Eastern Bloc countries. And they're very skilled. They're very skilled at hiding that it's a new sword, that they're very skilled at making swords that look like medieval swords.
Cool.
One of the things among us that know, we don't talk about what's wrong with those swords ever in public, because that makes it easier for them to not make those mistakes. These things, like, there's some things that everybody knows about, like patination, that if the guard's patinaed differently than the blade, then that's probably a big, issue of questionability. Either that was put together after it was patinaed, or they're two different materials, or something's wrong there. There are certain patinas that look like they were done with acid, and you can tell those a little bit. And there's other things that are curators have known about this for long time. But there are other things stylistically, design wise, that we can look at a sword in the catalog and go fake. We may talk about them amongst ourselves, makers of swords of that era, but we don't talk about it in
publicly. Got it. Well, unrelated topic then. Something that I watched occur is kind of like the way you summed up your life. How you got from there to here looks like a straight line now, but you're not really sure when you're making the choices along the way where you arrive. But you can see how it's done. And when I watched Jamie make his sword for the episode that he was on, and I watched you work on your Damascus steel blades, is that you have a definite method of turning things that start out as just layers of different levels of nickel and coke and whatever else. And then, well, I meant coke like as in like coal dust.
It's not. We don't use that.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just watching you guys make alchemy.
No, we use two different alloys of steel, but not
okay. But you smash it and it transitions from just flat layers of things
Yeah.
into organic shapes. And
Yep.
it's something that you can repeat the beginning
Mhm.
to the end, but you
Mhm.
can't necessarily figure out the beginning by looking at the end. Is that true?
If you have enough skill and experience, you probably can go backwards. There's some patterns that I've been able to do that with. Some things get too complex, and I'm like, no, I ain't got nothing. But a lot of stuff you can kind of go backwards and break it apart by elements and figure out what it was if you have enough experience at doing things. A lot of it is just knowing how the material flows
Mm-hmm.
when you're working it, because it's not fluid, but it is. You
Mm-hmm.
know, it's plastic when it's at temperature, so it's like clay. And if you hit it from one direction first, the material will backfill and the pattern will change. Go from, keep things in a different angle, then it'll backfill in a different way. And over the years, Jamie and I both, and many other makers, have looked at, okay, if I do this, this, and this, then it ends up like this.
Mm.
We have a little building block. Okay, now we have C's. Okay, so if I do it like this instead of like this, I end up with this shape. Okay, so now I have S's. And then, okay, now I have an S and a C shape, and I can stack those up in different ways. And now I can get like a serpent bar. Cool. And then I can go and take that and put it on the side. And now I have a serpent going, kitty corner, however, and then build that up into mosaic tiles. And then that's kind of we call mosaic theory,
Mm-hmm.
where you're affecting the ingrained pattern mostly by forging an angle or you know, direction, angle, or amount kind of changes how that material flows. If I forge really heavily in one dimension and then forge the other way, I'll get
Right.
a slightly. If I forge evenly to the same dimension at the same angle, if that makes sense.
I'm sure it makes sense to those that it makes sense.
And it's not simple, but it's definitely like once you kind of get how it flows, it gets a little easier to understand for sure.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't
Now,
always work exactly the way you want it to either. So there always is some experimentation, like the pattern I just finished. I was trying to make trees, and the trees didn't look exactly the way I wanted them to. And in hindsight, I know why the material moved the way it did.
mm-hmm.
But it's didn't when I was thinking my way through the pattern, it didn't do exactly what I wanted it to. So now I have another idea of how to make that pattern look the way I want it to. So I'll do it something different the next time.
And that's what it's all about, right? Iterating the knowledge that you have to hopefully start to control the output that your intent
Right.
shapes.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And in each iteration of it gets closer to what I have in my head. So this one, I finished the knife out. It looks great, and it's blowing people's minds.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. It's more of a Bob Ross pencil sketch than I wanted more of a Bob Ross finished painting. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like little trees, not little tree.
Yeah, but it's the steps along the way, and you always get to make another knife.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
That's why it's a passion versus a job. Is you know where you want to get, but you haven't gotten there yet, so you keep working the problem until you eventually
Yeah.
find it.
Yeah. And sometimes you'll abandon an avenue as a dead end, and sometimes you'll find that it leads you somewhere you didn't expect to go. It'll be like this idea that you're chasing. Maybe it ended up being not as cool as you thought it was, but hey, it gives you this other idea for this other thing that's really similar but way cooler.
Right.
That instead, and that ends up being quite a bit of what progresses in the shop. I think I see Jamie do that all the time. He started trying to track down this one pattern that he was trying to figure out that was from a find in Illerup. It's like 5th or 7th century, something like that. These swords. It's like the first mosaic swords or the oldest version of mosaic swords we found. Really kind of the only ones.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone's trying to figure out how they did some of these things. and so there's one that's called a palmette because it looks a little palm tree.
Mm-hmm.
Jamie chasing palmettes for a while, and he's still chasing palmettes to get that right. But half of his pattern welding right now is palmette adjacent. Like everything he's doing is like, it's like the palmette, but instead of doing this, you do this. Okay, Jamie, you lost me 5 steps ago. Go.
Yeah, that's the fun, right? That's the addicting part, is like is chasing that. And then it needs to always be elusive, otherwise you've arrived. You know?
No, you just find something different, Chase. So,
Yeah, maybe if you ever catch it, it's like you know, a greyhound catching a rabbit.
Finish. You never want to finish.
Yes.
You know, like there's a sword that I have in my head that I will never try to make, because it's like, when I think the word sword, that's what happens. It's in my head. This picture, you know, that's the sword I'll never make, because once I make that, I'll never make another sword. You know what I mean? If I get to the goal, point.
Yeah, that it's the greatest song in the world. In the world, this is the tribute.
Yeah. So I had this really good friend of mine. I was just thinking about him because I went to the Ren Fair over the weekend, and where I knew him from. And he was he's a recovering heroin addict, but he's been clean for 20 years now, 30 years. And I remember him telling me that like he got success too soon, and that's what fucked his life up. Like he was like 20 something, and he went out to LA and he got a job. He was like super into like makeup effects. You know, that was his thing. He wanted to do like creatures and stuff. And he got a job working for one of the houses out there. And immediately worked on some really cool projects, and was like, but he was like 23, and he like was like a senior member of their like sculpting team, and like had nowhere to go. You know, he's living in LA, he's like 23, 25 years old, and has like reached his goal. And he's like, that was the worst thing ever. Because then what the fuck do I do?
Right.
He's like, stagnant. I don't have nothing. I got no goal. I got nowhere to go. I got nothing to do. So I just got high. You know, it started with booze with him, and then he's got an addictive personality anyway. But like, it just totally wrecked his life. And then he ended up back here in Connecticut and had to rebuild his life.
Wow.
You know? And now I look at him, and he's like, he's got like 4 businesses. He's like clean. He's got a kid. He's got a wife. He's like happy. You know, he's doing great. But it's because he doesn't have, like, he always now has goals. Or he had this one thing that he worked his whole teen, young adult life for, and he got it. And then what?
Yeah, that's tough. Like when you finally get your dream thing, like you build your dream sword.
Yeah.
Or yeah, that's tough.
I don't want to do it. Plus, there's also the thing of like, I finally build it, and then I look at it and I hold it, and it's like, it's not what I want. It's not right. You know what I mean?
Right.
Then what you did? It's like that's a feeling of failure I don't want to deal with.
Yeah, that's tough. I don't know. I think I am about to embark on one of those things. I've had some ideas in my mind for a long time, and I've waited till now. My family are raised. They are functioning on their own. My children are. You know, my wife's ready for the next adventure. So there's nothing to hold me back. I've already crossed the Rubicon on parenthood. So now I can finally devote everything to the pursuit of making my perfect sword, you know? So I'll let you know what it's like when I achieve that. But I've already got 4 or 5.
Go close.
Yeah.
Go close, and then Jason. You know what I mean? Like, because otherwise you have no goal. Or unless you have a goal after that. Like if you have
I do. I always have an ulterior goal.
And for me, that's true too. Like I say that, but like it's symbolic more than anything else for me, because like there's so many other things I want to make, so many other things I want to study and look into, and my time, I don't have enough time I don't have enough time, and I don't have enough like physical capacity to do what I want to do. Everything.
Mm. So
Between, like,
how are you picking it? Like, are you just serially dating, or are you just committed to one
whoever
thing?
screams fucking loudest is who gets my attention. Um, you know, like, so there's a sword, it's a Bowie knife that I was looking at in a museum locally to me, and it was interesting to me. I really like old Bowies. Like, that's something that I've been. When I started doing the ABS thing, like, that was kind of the link for me to like learn the vocabulary, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense. You know, because I was doing this medieval thing, and I get to the ABS guys, and they don't get that. Like, you can put a really well made, perfect sax in front of them, and they're like, "Okay, it's cool. I don't know what it is." And
Right.
they can't judge it. They can't really get it because they don't have the context for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew, like, if I'm gonna do the testing thing, then I need to like find a common language, find a common context between me and them. So I looked around at what I was making and what I was happy to make and what I liked making, and what interested me, and it started to be um, 18th and 19th century knives. That was like the context that I kind of joined the two,
Right.
and from that I got really into antique Bowie knives, and like really like, especially over the last couple of years, I've become more and more interested in those knives, and they're really fascinating, interesting, and subtle designs, and it's kind of cool because they're like here, so I can actually see them, whereas
Right.
the swords are not here, and it's much harder to go like see them. It's very difficult to get into a back room of a museum and measure swords.
Right.
That's not an easy thing to do, and then in curate you got to have very good relationship with curators, and they don't want you to do certain things to them, so it's tough.
Yeah,
Whereas
absolutely.
most of the Bowie knives are in private hands, and collectors are like, anything you want to learn from this, let me know. This is cool. I want to, because they're excited. They want to share it. So it's much easier in a lot of ways to study those. And even the smaller museums tend to be a little bit more open about
Letting you look at them.
yeah, they'd be not holding them, but they're more free with information than say the Met or the Smithsonian or one of those. And the Met is, once you break through that their bureaucratic BS, the Met is amazing to deal with.
Right.
But it is something difficult and special to get back there and document these swords. But anyway, so there was a Bowie knife that was in a small local museum in Canton, and I thought it was cool. It was an interesting knife. It was a weird kind of coffinish handle, but it
Mm-hmm.
was made by a guy in Hartford I'd never heard of. And I was like, that's kind of cool. I didn't know there was a lot of Bowie knives. Generally, they're made in Arkansas or southern states, but this one was made in the West or in the Northeast. So that's kind of cool. All right. So I mentioned it to my editor, and he was like, "Oh, really? That's the guy's name? Huh? Yeah. There's like one knife, and it's not that one. It's in like circulation." And he
Wow.
sends me a picture to it. I'm like, "Oh, that's cool." And it has the same. It's very similar mark on it. So I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
okay. And he sends me information on the maker that he found. It was like some newspaper clippings and a few other things, all supporting where he was in Hartford. Well, that's kind of cool. So I go back to the museum and say, hey, I'd really like to be able to document this thing because it's interesting. Nobody knows about it. And like, it's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, they were nice enough to take it out of the case and let me take some quick cell phone pictures. And I set up a date, and I came back and got actual measurements and stuff and got more information on it. Meanwhile, my editor got super excited and sent me all this information on it, and like tells me about like, you know, we got to research this and this and this and then super excited, and like shows me another maker from Newark named Alfred Hunter, who made a bunch of Bowie knives. And what's really fascinating is that guy from Newark, his knives share features with this maker in Hartford
Oh.
very exclusively. Like and it's interesting because like the dagger that's kind of in circulation by Wilkinson,
Uh-huh.
it's the H. Wilkinson is the name of the maker. it has a guard on it that's a dead, like stolen design from Alfred Hunter, but everything else is kind of based on other makers' works. And then this knife, the guard isn't anything like the Alfred Hunter, but the handle is. The handle's dead copy, and it's a pretty like it's a pretty unique handle. There's only I've only seen one other maker ever, and he was another maker in Newark that I think did this one. So it's kind of like, well, now I have to try to figure out where I'm starting to like research and go, okay, well, when did this guy come here? Because he's supposed to be British. He's supposed to be from London. So
right.
London trade. All right, so where did he come in the country? That's the next thing I'm trying to find. So I'm like, I got a bunch of queries out to find out when he came into the country, and then so now I'm turning into like a history nerd. It's like research stupid knife. It's just a cool like Bowie knife that I found in a yeah.
It's like you're doing a genealogy of the knife.
Yeah, pretty much. And then like it was kind of cool because then a couple of things I found on the guy. Mark, my editor, sent me this posting in the newspaper in the Hartford Current or Hartford Times or whatever it was before the Current, 1840s, and it was a notice of a robbery that the Wilkinson shop had been on Front Street in Hartford had been robbed, and several knives had been stolen. He was offered a reward for return of the knives, and they weren't his knives. They were all knives in for repairs.
Oh.
And that's super interesting to me because I'm like, if there's only 2 knives out there with this dude's mark, right, how did he make a living for 30, 40 years? Like, that doesn't make sense.
Right.
How do you have 2 shops on Front Street in Hartford, which was like pretty big money at the time? Like that was uptown Hartford,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Big city at the time. Like that was, Colt was going gangbusters then. There was money in Hartford. And I'm like, well, how is he making money? Well, now I know, because now he's repairing pocket knives, and he's putting new blades in them and changing off the scales on the handle to pearl or ivory. And then he's, fixing other people's knives. Like he's repairing things.
Right.
But all of a sudden he's not putting his name on half or 2/3 of his work because it's not his work. That explains why there's only 2 or 3 knives in existence from this dude.
Wow.
Because you figure a percentage of knives that are going to like exist, so I've probably made, 300, 400 knives in 30 years. Like that's, maybe more, maybe less. I don't know, throw a number out there. In 150 years, how many of the 300 knives that I make in a career are going to still exist?
Right. Probably less than a third,
5%, 30%, 20%. Who fucking knows?
Right.
Like it could be 2%. It's so much of it depends on style, what happens between there. If there's like so many knives were lost during World War II because of the steel shortages. That was like the whole Liberty, bring your old knives to donate so that we can make new guns, like that whole thing. And it was patriotic to bring these old junky junk that they didn't want.
Right.
It wasn't major. It was great grandma's kitchen knife from 1810, whatever. And that got turned into scrap metal, which got turned into Liberty ships or whatever.
Wow.
Well, that erased a whole section of history. And the same thing happens in Europe during certain times of conflict. Old swords get turned into new swords. Old knives get turned into new knives. Old weapons get turned into new weapons, because they have to, because they need the resources.
Right.
But that means that a huge percentage of that work is gone forever.
Yeah. I mean, it's both sad and also it says something about human nature, the way we reuse things in a new way, as a matter of our survival, because back then we didn't think there was always more resource, right? So
right.
Now we seem to think that everything's inexhaustible. you know, we may be discovering that that isn't the case now. We may be starting to learn that you can't have a disposable society, but
Yeah,
who knows?
they're always finite, but you know, where's the end of that finiteness?
Mhm.
Where's the end? We don't
Well,
know.
as we discuss the end, I'm going to go ahead and bring us to a close because I have had a fantastic time talking with you and learning more about knives and patterns and the flow of linear time. Uh, it's been an amazing conversation, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing it with me, and I hope you'll come on the show again someday.
Sure, whenever, man. That was fun. I
All right,
cool.
and